All right, we'll go ahead and get started in just a second. Dave's going to start us with the word of prayer as we get going this morning. Amen. Thank you, Dave. All right. We are in chapter 5 of our book with A Glimpse into God's Heart by Kirk Brothers, page 49. This is the second chapter where he's getting into some of the details here in Leviticus 16 about the Day of Atonement and how it works. So in chapter 4, we looked at the preparation that's being made, some of the context in which all of this is set. Chapter 5 focuses on purification, and I want to look in some detail at the sections here. It gets into the specifics about how this works and helps to set us up for some of the later chapters. Starting out here on page 49, he starts with this speech delivered at the dedication of an elementary school in McMinnville, Tennessee. It says, a hospital corpsman second class in the U.S. Navy, Bobby Ray, served in South Vietnam as a Marine medic. And when his country called, he left his home in McMinnville to help his fellow countrymen who were fighting foreign people on foreign soil. His life was dedicated to saving others, and he always did it with commitment and courage, even as gunshots and mortar shells blasted around him. March 19, 1969, at the age of 24, Bobby Ray went above and beyond the call of duty. As enemy troops began a heavy assault on the Marines' Battery D, Ray began working on the serious and heavy casualties that fell from rocket and mortar blasts. As he treated a fallen Marine, Ray himself became seriously wounded. Refusing medical help, he continued to provide emergency medical treatment to the other casualties. As the enemy drew closer, Ray was forced to battle oncoming soldiers while he administered medical aid. He did this until he ran out of ammunition and was fatally wounded. But before he died, Bobby Ray performed one more life-saving act. He threw himself on the last patient he ever treated and saved him from an enemy grenade. Hospital Corpsman Second Class David Robert Ray gave his own life to save the lives of many others. He became an inspiration to the soldiers in Battery D who went on to defeat the enemy. For this ultimate sacrifice, the United States awarded Ray the Medal of Honor posthumously. And as he notes here, this is a story, and there are countless others. Just one story of an individual sacrificing himself for others. It says it's the picture that's painted on the Day of Atonement in Leviticus 16. Again, he talked in the last chapter a lot about how God often teaches by illustrations and metaphors, and that's what the Day of Atonement ultimately is, right? As we've discussed, it's not actually fixing the sin problem, but it's providing this illustration, this image, this metaphor about sacrifice and cost and all of these things, and ultimately painting a picture for what's going to come with the new covenant. It says, if human beings are to live spiritually, there must be a sacrifice. What do you say, this last statement here, this is the end of the paragraph above the purification header. What do you suppose he means? He says, if human beings are to live spiritually, there must be a sacrifice. What do you think he means by it? I think he means something specific, and y'all can tell me if you agree or not, but what do you suppose he means when he says, if human beings are to live spiritually, there must be a sacrifice? And in a second, I'll tell you what I think. I'm not certain about this, but it's an interesting statement. You think he meant to say that, or oh, you're thinking that, okay. To live physically, there has to be a sacrifice. Oh, yeah, okay, yeah, literally for the illustration that he gave. Yes, absolutely. Any other thoughts? To live spiritually, there must be a sacrifice. What do you think about that? Okay, yeah, I can think of a couple different ways that you could take it. Because often we talk about how we live spiritually, right? The way we go through life. I don't think that's what he means, and I think maybe it kind of goes hand in hand with the example that he gave, but any thoughts? I guess two things occur to me about this story. Number one, the example that he gives with Bobby Ray and saving his fellow soldiers. It makes me think, does it make anybody else think of Romans chapter 5? Where Paul talks about, no man's going to be willing to give his life, for some wicked scoundrel. But he talks about how there are a few brave souls who would give their lives for another, right? And this is the kind of person he's talking about, I think. You're not going to risk your life, for just anybody. But on some occasions, there are those brave few people who will do it. Police officers, firefighters, EMTs, people like Bobby Ray, who will put themselves in harm's way for the sake of other people, right? For a good man, some would risk their lives, but then there are these brave few who would be willing to do it for others. And then he goes into talking about how Christ is willing to do it for other people. Yes, sir, Dave, for those who don't deserve it. So Navy medics. Right. Yeah. So, right. Some people could say, well, it's not my responsibility, but he wasn't, he didn't say that. He was willing to go far above and beyond. So it makes me think of Romans 5 and the example that Paul gives there. He's one of those few who's willing to do something like that. Where he says if human beings are to live spiritually, there must be a sacrifice. Paul in 1 Corinthians 15 talks about fleshly bodies versus spiritual bodies, right? He talks about being changed in the twinkling of an eye. Physical bodies are not suitable to live in a spiritual realm. I think that's what he means here. I think what he means quite literally is if you want to have a home in heaven, if in your spiritual body you want to inhabit a place where God is, then a sacrifice is needed in order to do that. Granted, like in the example he gives, if you want to live physically, a sacrifice is needed, right? For these Marines that were saved by the sacrifice of Bobby Ray in the example. If you want to live spiritually, that is this spiritual body that is put on for eternity. If you want to live where God is, a sacrifice is necessary for that to happen. Does that make sense? Does anybody else agree with that? I think that's what he means by that. The book of Leviticus is important to understanding forgiveness. And again, he comes back to this main idea here that Leviticus 16, the Day of Atonement, is like the hub of the wheel around which the rest of the book rotates. Okay, so he starts out with the purification. It says, most families have a special time for spring cleaning. Dust collects in the winter months, mist in the daily and weekly cleaning. The Day of Atonement is similar. It's like a once a year spiritual spring cleaning for the Israelites. It's a time when they cleanse the tabernacle of any spiritual defilement that had taken place during the year. Because of course they're offering sacrifices, all year long. But you have this annual event in which everyone's attention is focused on this, and you have these extra steps taken in the way of purification. Leviticus 16:11 details this process, and we'll look at the specific sections as we go through them here in a moment. It says, having bathed, clothed himself appropriately in linen garments, and gathered the proper animals, which we all talked about in the last chapter, Aaron was ready to begin the process of purification. As the wording at the beginning of verse 11 is the same at the beginning of verse 6. The significance of this is that Moses gave an overview of the process in 6 to 10, and then backed up to the beginning and filled in the details. The order is, number 1, sacrifice of the bull of sin offering, 11 to 14. Number 2, sacrifice of the goat of sin offering, 15 to 17. The blood rituals, 18 and 19. The people's scapegoat, 20 to 22. Number 5, the sacrifice of rams for burnt offering, 23 to 25. And then finally, step 6, the final washing and disposal, 26 to 28. So some elements were covered in discussion in the previous chapter, a few warrant further attention. So we kind of lightly touched on this, but we're going to go into more detail as he kind of backs up and reiterates the process. Which to me is a little bit like, and I think we touched on this a couple of weeks back, you have the 10 Commandments, correct? That describe man's relationship with God and also man's relationship with one another. You have the 10 Commandments that set forth these very broad, basic principles, and then you have all these other rules and ordinances and laws that come along that really help to flesh out and give more explanation and guidance concerning those. Similar here. He starts with a snapshot and then goes back and revisits it in more detail. All right, so verses 11 to 14 of Leviticus 16 says, and Aaron shall bring the bullock of the sin offering, which is for himself, and shall make an atonement first for himself and for his house, and shall kill the bullock of the sin offering, which is for himself. He shall take a censer full of burning coals of fire from off the altar before the Lord, his hands full of sweet incense beaten small, and bring it within the veil. And he shall put the incense upon the fire before the Lord, that the cloud of the incense may cover the mercy seat that is upon the testimony, that he die not. Again, a reminder, the extreme seriousness of how he goes about this. He shall take of the blood of the bullock, sprinkle it with his finger upon the mercy seat eastward, and before the mercy seat shall he sprinkle of the blood with his finger 7 times. Again, Aaron has to make atonement for himself before the community. Why? Why does he have to make atonement for himself before he can go and make atonement for other people? Because if he's going to come into the presence of God, he himself must be pure, correct? Otherwise, it's said in the passage right here, if he doesn't purify himself first, what's going to happen when he tries to go beyond the veil? He's going to die. Right? He has to be pure before he can stand in God's presence, and then, only then, can he make offering for the rest of the people. And we'll come to it in the discussion questions in a minute, but keep that thought in mind because it's important. Okay, the incense of protection. It says, Aaron took coals from the altar of incense into the most holy place. The only time of year he can go in here. And he's the only one who can go in there. He placed 2 handfuls of incense. He placed 2 handfuls of incense on the coals, and the resultant smoke covered the mercy seat. Some believe this was to cover Aaron so God might not see him, the sinner, and destroy him. But it seems clear that the purpose was to cover the presence of God and not the presence of Aaron. The text states, Leviticus 16:13, that the cloud of incense may cover the mercy seat. This was in accordance with God's statement in Exodus 33:20, you cannot see my face, for no man shall see me and live. We're again reminded of the danger of God's presence. Anybody have any particular thoughts one way or the other on that one? The purpose of this incense? I hadn't really thought about that until I came back and saw this, that the purpose of the incense is to create almost like a smoke screen so that they can't really see one or the other. That's right, yeah. I agree with what he says. The purpose is to shield Aaron from what's happening here, not the other way around. The sprinkling of blood. Sprinkling of blood was similar to the procedure used with the regular sin offering for a priest. That's in Leviticus 4. The main difference is the location at which the blood is sprinkled. During a regular sin offering, it was sprinkled on the veil separating the holy place from the most holy place. On the Day of Atonement, the blood was taken into the very presence of the Lord in the most holy place. Again, we can't overemphasize the singular nature of everything that's happening on this particular day. Baruch Levine states, the blood was sprinkled once over the mercy seat and then 7 times in front of it. The first sprinkling was done with an upward motion and the other 7 sprinklings with a downward motion. The number 7 is the most frequent of the symbolic numbers used in the Bible and is found in nearly 600 passages as a symbol of totality or completeness. Oftentimes in the prophetic, so sometimes you see like the specific mention of 7 like you have here. Other times you'll find it, and it isn't necessarily obvious. Amos, I think, is a good example. In some of the prophetic writings, you'll have the prophets delivering, I guess, tidings of doom, for lack of a better word. The burden to so-and-so, the burden to Edom, or the burden to Egypt. And it'll have these sections in which he'll address a particular people or particular group. Sometimes it's Israel or Judah. Sometimes it's the priests. But you'll have a section where he's addressing a particular people with a prophecy, and then he'll turn and address another group with a prophecy. Oftentimes, if you go back and count, you'll find that there's 7 of them. They tend to come in groups of 7. So sometimes it's very specific and very obvious like you have here. Other times, you find 7, and it's not necessarily readily apparent, but it's still there. It said it's worth noting that in Levitical sacrifices, the location at which the blood is sprinkled is determined by the proximity of the worshiper to God. And he references back to the camp layout that was referred to earlier. The closer the worshiper was allowed to come to God, the closer the blood was sprinkled. For the common people, so those who are not priests, it was sprinkled on the altar in the courtyard. For priests, it was sprinkled on the veil between the holy and most holy places. Finally, on the Day of Atonement, the high priest placed it on the ark itself. Okay, I want to reemphasize this. We've talked about it before, but this idea of degrees of separation. You have God. What comes? So if God is at the top, and you think of degrees of separation between God and man, there's God. Then who comes next below that? High priest. Who comes after that? Priests. Who comes after that? Common people. Non-priests. What did he say? People. People who are not priests, correct? Okay. And they're all Israelites, right? The high priest, the priest, and then the common people. God's people, Israelites. And he notes here that this idea that where the blood gets sprinkled, where the sacrifice is ultimately consummated, depends upon how close one is in this hierarchy to God, correct? And he also talked about in the last chapter this idea that the priests wore these very elaborate outfits, for lack of a better word, as they're going about their priestly duties. On the Day of Atonement, the high priest puts on this very simple linen garment to go into the holiest of holies. And he expressed this idea, and again, I agree, hopefully y'all do too, that the idea there is the priests dress the way they do because they're facing towards the people who are not priests. Aaron is dressing the way he does on the Day of Atonement because he is facing toward God, right? It's a difference in the two. In the New Testament, you have God, then you have high priest, which is whom? Jesus, correct? He's filling the role of high priest and mediator. Then you go down one more level, and you have who? Priests. It's the same system. God, high priest, priests. In the new covenant, who are priests? Christians. So in the New Testament, who are the common people amongst Israelites, as it were? There are none. There are none. Right? I mean, think about in the New Testament, right? So Paul, Romans 9, you're not all Israel that are Israel. Think of Galatians 3, right? Isaac is the seed, and the seed, Christ is the seed, right? Christ is the seed. If you are in Christ, you're in the seed, and you're a recipient of the blessings. In the Old Covenant, there are Israelites who are not priests, and they have to go through priests and through a high priest ultimately to have this access to God. Under the New Covenant, this idea of spiritual Israelites, correct? The church, correct? There's God, there's Christ, and then there's priests. There is no one in the church who is not a priest, right? And I think in my mind this keeps coming back to this idea of the priests having all of this pomp and circumstance and being someone special because they then have to go and deal with the common people. Part of the reason this comes to mind is because in the Catholic Church in particular, I don't know if you've heard the terms before, but they have the ecclesiastical hierarchy, and then they have lay people, right? Has anyone ever heard the term lay people, the laity? There's no such thing. In the Old Covenant, there kind of is. Because you've got kind of John Q. Israelite, the common person, who's not a priest. He has to, if the common Israelite wants to make a sacrifice or wants to somehow access God, he has to go to a priest in order to get there. A lot of the religious world today thinks the same way, right? If you're a Catholic, right? If you're a Catholic and you have a spiritual problem, what do? You go to a priest, right? And what does the priest do? Y'all may not, you're not Catholics, so you may, but what does the priest do? You go to the priest and what do? You have to go to the priest to make a confession, right? To go sit in the little booth and tell him all your sins, and then he'll tell you some way to not make atonement, I don't think it's quite the right word. He'll say, well, you need to go and say 10 Hail Marys or whatever, count your rosary beads. He'll tell you what you can then, as a common lay person, can go do to make things right. In the Old Testament, it kind of works like that. Because you have all these Israelites who are non-priest, common people, kind of like this idea of the laity, and they have to go to a priest. And ultimately, even the priests can only have themselves purified by the high priest who goes into the most holy place once a year and has to first purify himself before he can go in, right? Under the New Covenant, in the New Testament, it's the same scheme. You've got God at the top, then a high priest, and then priests. But Christians are the priesthood. There is no laity. Does this make sense to everyone? There's no such thing as priests and laity. That's an Old Testament concept. The same way that like all of this ritual and pomp and circumstance, and you think about, again, using Catholic priests as an example, there are other denominations that do it, where they have the elaborate get-up. You think about like cardinals with the hats and the chains and the incense and all these things. In the New Testament, there's none of that. Does that make sense to everybody? Like the setup is the same, but the way that it works is totally different. Making sense? I hope so. I hope I'm making sense. I'm trying to. Okay, where was I? So are you familiar with Catholic tradition? Is what I'm saying correct? If you're just a regular Joe, you have to go to a priest if you need something. Yeah, you have to go to a priest. That's the way it works in the Old Testament. And again, the reason I'm bringing this up is where he's pointing out this idea that depending on which of these groups you're in, whether you're a regular Joe, a priest, or a high priest, determines how close you can get to the most holy place. Yes? Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's kind of the same, isn't it? And maybe this is what you're talking about, but like if you go into like a cathedral or a Catholic church, if you're not a priest, you literally can't even go to that part of the building. Again, it's the same idea. Yeah, yes, sir, Dave. Yeah. Yeah. Does it make sense to everyone when I say in the New Testament church, there's no laity, right? Christians are a royal priesthood. Now, if that's the case, if Christians are priests, what's the next step in the chain? You're a priest, you want access to God, who's the next? Where do you go? The high priest. Who's the high priest? Jesus. So hopefully what I'm driving at here is this idea of degrees of separation in the New Testament, it's almost completely flattened. You don't have laity, priest, high priest, God. You have God, high priest, and then you and I, as Christians, go straight to the high priest. Does that make sense? It's a tremendous difference. And again, looking at all of the ritual and everything in the Day of Atonement, and all of the trouble and effort that it takes for the high priest just to get close enough to the mercy seat to do all of this on pain of death if he does it incorrectly, again, helps to underscore and paint the picture of just how valuable all of this is. Again, and hopefully helps to give us appreciation for what we have in the New Testament. Correct, through the mediator, who's also, high priest and mediator serving the same role. Okay, so he talks about these degrees of separation and the priest being able to approach to sprinkle this blood and make this offering. All right, continuing verses 15 to 17, the goat sin offering. He says, "Then shall he kill the goat of the sin offering, that is for the people," right? So everything he's done up to this point has been for himself and his household. Now he's dealing with the people. "Bring his blood within the veil, and do with that blood as he did with the blood of the bullock, and sprinkle it upon the mercy seat and before the mercy seat. And he shall make an atonement for the holy place because of the uncleanness of the children of Israel and because of their transgressions and all their sins." Just to revisit what we said last week, talking about what is atonement. Atonement is something that you do, right? There's an action involved. You do something, you give something specifically in order to settle something wrong that has happened, right? So it kind of carries this idea of paying a debt, but the reason you're doing it is because someone has been aggrieved. It's kind of like, if you wrong someone and you say, what can I do to make it right? What can I do to atone for this? What can I offer you? What can I give you? What can I do in order to settle things, in order to make it right, in order to somehow pay you back, to do what I can to make things right for the wrong that I did? It says he's making an atonement for the holy place because of the uncleanness of the children of Israel, because of their transgressions and all their sins. Right, so that's the atonement. That's specifically what we're dealing with. You're doing something, you're offering something because of some wrong that's been done. "So shall he do for the tabernacle of the congregation that remaineth among them in the midst of their uncleanness. And there shall be no man in the tabernacle of the congregation when he goeth in to make an atonement in the holy place, until he come out and have made an atonement for himself and for his household and for all the congregation of Israel." Okay, so as he notes, the same procedures followed with the people's goat of sin offering that had been followed with the bull. Only the high priest is to be within the tent during this event. All the other people who would normally be around have to clear out when this is happening. It says Aaron is engaged in a very dangerous activity. It was imperative that all others stay away, or death would be the consequence. "So shall he make atonement for the holy place because of the uncleanness of the children of Israel, because of their transgressions, for all their sins. And so he shall do for the tabernacle of meeting, which remains among them in the midst of their uncleanness." says, the sins and impurities of the people defiled God's dwelling place. It specifically tells us that the tabernacle itself is defiled because of the Israelites and all of their transgressions. The only way a holy God could dwell among a sinful people is if their sins and impurities had been atoned for and the tabernacle itself had been cleansed. Levine stresses that the purity of God's dwelling place had to be maintained. He says, quote, in a very real sense, this was the primary purpose in the entire biblical ritual of Yom Kippur. As I said, Yom Kippur is the Day of Atonement. Your thoughts? Do you agree? I'm not entirely sure that I agree with the statement, but what do y'all think? What would you say is the primary purpose? So he says the primary purpose of all of this is to maintain the ritual purity of the tabernacle, so that God can continue to visit it year after year. That's certainly part of it. I would agree with that. Again, the high priest has to purify for himself before he can go make offering on behalf of the people. The tabernacle itself has to be purified. I agree. I don't know that I would say that I agree that the Day of Atonement, the whole purpose of it is around maintaining this purity. What would y'all say? And in fact, I don't know that we have a definitive correct answer for it. But what would you say? What would y'all say is the primary purpose of the Day of Atonement? Forgiveness, ultimately. Like I said, again, I would say that's part of it. I'm not saying he's totally wrong for saying that part of the reason for all of this is to ensure that things are kept pure, they're kept holy. Certainly, yes, that's correct. I disagree that it's the primary purpose. If I were Jewish, I might agree with that. If I practiced Judaism, I might say, sure, that's the case. From a Christian perspective, though, I don't know that I agree. What's the main point of all of this? Would you say? I would argue the primary purpose of all of this is to give examples, lessons, illustrations, metaphors, however you want to put it, for the new covenant that's ultimately going to come, and do all of this not just in practice, or in, I guess, foreshadowing, but in actuality. Again, it's to teach. It's to instruct. I would argue. He could be right. I don't know. Okay, so you have the goat of sin offering that follows the same pattern as the others. The important thing to note about this is that all the other people have to clear out. No one else can be in the tabernacle while this is happening. Continuing at 18 to 20, the blood rituals. It says, and he shall go out unto the altar that is before the Lord, make an atonement for it, and shall take of the blood of the bullock and of the blood of the goat, the two offerings that have already been made, and put it upon the horns of the altar round about. He shall sprinkle of the blood upon it with his finger 7 times, and cleanse it, and hallow it from the uncleanness of the children of Israel. And when he hath made an end of reconciling the holy place, and the tabernacle of the congregation, and the altar, he shall bring the live goat. Okay, so, blood of the animals is emphasized again. And Leviticus 17, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with, talks about the significance of this. The life of the flesh is in the blood, and I've given it to you upon the altar to make atonement for your souls, for it is the blood that makes atonement for the soul. The term kippur, atonement, is found 16 times in chapter 16, 33 times elsewhere in Leviticus. Because its meaning is difficult, for it seems to be used in 2 different ways, ransom and cleansing. In the sacrificial system, the animal is the ransom the condemned man pays to redeem or buy back his life, signified in the shedding of blood. The blood also serves to cleanse the tabernacle and worshipers from the defilements of impurity and sin. All right, blood rituals from the bull and the goat, cleansing the altar, again ensuring that everything in the tabernacle is completely pure so that all of this process on the Day of Atonement can be carried out in a manner that maintains the purity of everything involved with it. A condemned man pays to redeem his life, signified in the shedding of blood, right? Again, the main idea being something has to be offered, a price has to be paid. And for the Israelites, it's a steep price. All right, I've got about a minute till, so Lord willing, we'll come back next week and continue looking at this with the scapegoat and the specific process for that. Thank y'all.